Welcome. My name is Ilan Haimoff, partner and head of the Profit Participation Services at GHJ. I wanted to welcome you to our GHJ's Entertainment Videocast series. And in this episode, we will feature Dr. Jeffrey Cole, a research professor and the director of the Center for the Digital Future at USC Annenberg School for Communications and Journalism. Dr. Cole has his pulse on the trends in the film and television industry, and he's here to share with us his observations as they stand today, and as he has been doing now for the last several years via podcast with us. So welcome, Jeff. We really appreciate your time.
Ilan, nice to be with you for our annual chat.
So I'm going to go right into my questions, and the first one being, what key permanent changes do you see resulting from the worldwide pandemic crisis of 2020, which, based on what I'm hearing, could actually extend into 2022? Where do we go from here?
Well, good way to start. Well, first, we've been living through the biggest disruption of our lifetime. Nothing even comes close. This has really been the greatest social science experiment of all time, except none of us volunteered for it. We know that everything in our lives has changed and is going to be reconsidered, from how we deal with doctors, how we work, how we learn, how we buy, and entertainment is no exception. Entertainment has been turned upside down. We saw movie theaters close. We moved almost all of our entertainment online, in addition to traditional broadcast and cable. Streaming use was up 55%. Among those under the age of 30, it was up 75%. In some of the work we did, we asked people what they missed being locked down. Movie theaters were very low on the list. We asked people what they enjoyed. And up there in the top 5 was more time for television. We finally had time to watch all those shows people have been telling us for years, all those 10-part miniseries that we have on a list. We know we wanted to watch, we know are good, but we finally got to watch them. The silly joke I make is during the pandemic, we didn't mind if The Irishman was 4.5 hours. So we really moved our entertainment online more than ever. The biggest loser in the pandemic, sadly for bad timing, was Jeffrey Katzenberg, who created Quibi, this really interesting service of short form content for young people on the go to watch on a subway or bus or just before work started or during a coffee break. Well, all of a sudden, he introduced it in April of 2020, this service for people on the go when we were going nowhere. And it didn't even get rejected. It didn't even get looked at. And the award for good timing was Disney and Apple, who had the good luck, they obviously didn't know ahead of time, to start their services 4 months before the pandemic. Netflix, of course, we were already locked into, and it had that deep catalog. But to have Disney Plus and Apple TV Plus through the pandemic really turned out to be a great business decision. All did well. HBO Max came along. It had different problems, which we may talk about. And I think Netflix comes out of the pandemic the most successful entertainment company in history, and I don't say that lightly. And I think the first dollar anyone spends on entertainment today goes to Netflix, and then we figure out where the rest of the dollars go. And we think it's going to be a long, slow road back for movie theaters.
Thank you, Jeff, for those comments. I wanted to shift a little bit and look at the crystal ball with you as best as we can for the coming year, and perhaps maybe a couple of years. There's a lot of rumors floating around, and all of it is in connection with the streaming wars you've mentioned that are heating up. as well as obviously the impact of the pandemic. But there's all kinds of rumors. One being Apple may be interested in buying the MGM library, perhaps buying a studio, perhaps buying Disney, perhaps merging with Netflix. And then there's conversations around Peacock and HBO Max possibly merging to fight as a joint venture Netflix, that you've mentioned being certainly the strongest in the marketplace. So with all of these rumors, anything that perhaps looking at the crystal ball with no guarantees, but just what could potentially might happen in the next couple of years?
Well, if I told you they were guaranteed, you shouldn't believe me anyway. Well, let's start with streaming. I argued before the pandemic, and I think it's still true, that we're going to pay for 2.5 of these SVOD services, the streaming services with monthly subscriptions. I said Netflix emerges owning the first dollars anyone spends. So we've got room, if I'm right, for another 1.5. And I think that war is largely going to be between Disney Plus and HBO Max. Apple, I don't think Apple TV Plus, it doesn't offer enough content. I don't think it's a compelling purchase. I don't think it's going to survive as a monthly fee service. I think Apple will continue to make it a giveaway if you buy Apple hardware. Paramount Plus started late in its challenge. I don't think it's going to be one of those 2.5. So it's got 2 or 3 possibilities. It can spend so much money on programming that people have to pay attention. I don't think Viacom's ready to do that. It can convince people they should pay for 3.5 of these. I don't think that's going to happen. Or it can merge. Peacock, Apple TV Plus, Paramount Plus are sort of hanging there. I don't think are going to make the core. Once again, I think the core is Netflix, HBO Max, and Disney. And you're going to see mergers. You're going to see streaming mergers. There aren't enough people paying for all of these to support. And you may see indeed studio acquisitions. The thing is, Rupert Murdoch learned, 3 years ago, the most powerful guy in the last 20 years in the entertainment business, that all of a sudden he'd become a small player. And Rupert didn't get small, everyone else got big. We're talking about trillion-dollar companies. So Apple, the biggest of the trillion, the $2 trillion companies, it could buy Disney and Netflix, regulatory problems aside. That would be a much smaller 2 acquisitions for them than Time Warner was for AT&T. So I think you're going to see Apple make a move. I think you're going to see Microsoft potentially make a move. You may see Google get in there somewhere. The 2 studios that really need some affiliation are Paramount as part of Viacom and Sony. You're going to see some kind of change there. But even Disney could be acquired. Disney's not too big for any of those trillion-dollar companies. So I think you're going to see all kinds of interesting moves. And I've always thought the Disney-Apple combination made sense. Bob Iger had been a long-time board member of Apple, only quit when they started Disney Plus. They're philosophically aligned. I've always thought that made sense.
Thank you, Jeff. And then to close, one last question to go back to, as you've indicated, the one part of the industry that has really suffered the most, which will be the theaters. What I wanted to get your perspective is, do the studios have a vested interest in their comeback, in their coming out of the crisis? And I say that with referencing back to HBO Max, making the decision of having the films be available for subscribers at the same time they're available in the theaters.
Great question. You could start by making the financial case. The studios are better off without the movie theaters because they don't have to share their revenue. but it's a much more complicated story than that. The question we still don't know is, can on a streaming only, on a day and date or released only to streaming, can you build a franchise? Can you build awareness? One of the questions we're going to see is, can you win an Academy Award, although that may not matter anymore, without being in a movie theater? A movie theater adds credibility. A movie theater adds a sense of urgency that streaming doesn't necessarily have. And we don't really have the answer to that yet. There's no opening. So all in all, I think the studios do have a vested interest in movie theaters. I think they add a glamour, they add an important sense to this. And they also, as I said, we haven't seen a franchise yet get built through streaming. And I think Warner Media decided to put all their 2021 movies on HBO Max at the same time they released them into the theater, not because they didn't care about movie theaters. I think they did that because they botched the launch of HBO Max. I think they sold out the entire theater business to give a hand to HBO Max. And, also what's really interesting is Godzilla versus Kong was really, for many people, the first movie that was sort of available after vaccines, willingness to go into the theater. And even though it was on HBO Max for free, if you were a subscriber, it did $100 million at the box office. That's the good news for movie theaters. The bad news is I did an unscientific poll, doing a lot of scientific work, but this was unscientific, asking people who went to the theater to see Godzilla versus Kong, did you go because you wanted to see that movie? Or did you go because you wanted to go to the movies and that was the one you settled on? 90% said the latter. They went to that movie because they wanted out of the house, and that was the film playing. That also implies that maybe after we've seen a couple of films, we'll get it out of our system and then go back. So it's unclear exactly what's going to happen. I have no doubt movie theaters will come back weaker. Two of the best chains, or two of the best theaters in the Southern California area that really gave you a movie-going experience not replicable at home, Cinerama Dome and Pacific Theaters, is gone. So I think movie theaters will come back less than they were, and we'll see what the price. But the ultimate big question is, to a studio, is can you have a billion-dollar film, which is what Disney specialized in pre-pandemic, without movie theaters? And that, I think, will determine the future of movie theaters.
Right. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for sharing your observations and commentary. I'd like to also thank all of you who have joined us to watch and listen to Dr. Cole. And thanks again.
Thank you, Ilan. Really always fun.